marketers in state farm. And I want to give everyone
Some days I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not hired.
I mean, you guys are doing pretty well. And in that time, she has led strategy, execution of some iconic campaigns, Shape from State Farm being one of them, as well as the discount double check. She oversees marketing strategy, campaign management, paid and earned social media, brand management, and creative development. So, good job. Awesome.
Thank you.
And as you guys can see, the title of the session here today is about sports and inflation. So we're going to start at the top. And I'd like you to, as one of the most largest and well-recognized brands in sports, talk to us a little bit about your approach to sports marketing, overall strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, but yes. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us today. Okay, so listen, we all know as marketers, it's about audience, right? We're all looking for the audience we're after, and we want to be able to do that at scale. Someone said that earlier today. Sports is a great way to do that. It's a huge part of our portfolio for that very reason, right? So we're very focused on finding that audience, doing it at scale, and even better when we can reach them in a passionate point, right? Because they're more engaged. So I think we all know that. Of course, that's part of what we do. We also are really looking at what we call the telescope and the microscope. So what I mean by that, thank you.
Thank you very much.
The telescope. We have been in sports marketing and what we would call synonymous with sports as a non-endemic brand for more than a decade. We do that because we think about our long-term strategic partnerships, whether that's leagues, whether that's schools, whether that's specific talent that we align ourselves to. You've seen us deploy that strategy over time too, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes or Chris Paul or now Caitlin Clark. Those are all about what are our long-term positions, how do we blanket sports in a way that we're going to break through, because look, we also all know you cannot turn on a game or a sporting event and not see 3-4 insurance brands, right? I'm sorry. Not sorry. But we have to have those long-term positions in order to blanket the environment and break through. And then when I talk about the microscope, what I mean there, it's really more about agility and creativity, and Craig just said that in the previous panel. How are we really thinking about what we can't plan? Sports is culture. The intersection between fashion and sports and gaming and music is culture. So you've got to be agile in that, and you really got to be deploying that agility in a creative way, or you're not going to break through. So, audience, telescope, microscope, and you've got to deploy those things equally, and that's really at the heart of our strategy.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And I think as we think about all of that approach in general, and now we find ourselves in an inflationary period, and so if that's the overall approach to sports marketing, how has State Farm adapted that strategy in this economic climate that we find ourselves in today?
Well, I mean, okay, a couple of things. The explosion around sports in the last year, and I would say specifically women's sports within that, driving a lot of explosion, has driven inflation in a way that we haven't seen. Like, it's kind of leapfrogged a little bit in the last year. So what I'd like to propose is, who in here has responsibility for marketing budget that you spend on sports? Let's make a pact. Let's not overpay for any inventory. I'm kidding. We want to pay a fair price, but we don't want to overpay. Our approach to that is, okay, we all are probably dealing with this. How are we going to do more with less? Or how are we going to do more with the same? Because I don't know about you guys, but my CMO, my CEO, they're not really writing out marketing checks to give us incremental dollars. So how are we going to do more with what we already have? How are we going to make the things that we have work harder for us? So I'll give a specific example. We've been in and around the basketball landscape for decades. we are no longer in a position where we're going to be able to look at our partnerships. So we're Overtime Elite, we're Overtime Select, we're NCAA, we're NBA, we're WNBA. Maybe another partnership that will be announced in the next couple weeks that we're really excited about. Point is, we've got a wide portfolio across basketball. We're not going to have the luxury anymore of looking at those leagues individually and building campaigns and silos for those leagues. So we're looking at how do we think about basketball as a broader category, and how do we start to build campaigns that drive and capitalize on basketball culture, and then find the spaces where we're going to go deeper into engagement and personalization. So your question around how are we combating inflation and how does that shift or evolve our strategy? How are we going to do more of the same? How are we going to find, we call them the red threads through things to make more of the assets we have? And then how are we going to create engagement and personalization in the right places so that we're going deeper with the audiences that we think we have those opportunities with? And we've got to think about all of those things really before we think about, dollars or more dollars, or because it'd be easy to go and say, hey, inflation, we need more money.
More money.
We don't subscribe to that. We're going to work harder, we're going to do better with what we have and find ways to break through, because that's one of our superpowers.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think one of the other trends that we often hear about when we talk about sports marketing in particular is the shift, and we've spoken a little bit about in the previous panel, the shift that consumers around behavior, specifically streaming television, probably the reason I'm sitting here. For those that don't know, Innovid is an ad server, and we serve about 1.4 billion impressions a day. Half of those end up on CTV, and ultimately, sports is moving to streaming. So, how have you been leaning into CTV now that sports are making that move, or consumers are making that move as well, driving the rights holders to push to streaming platforms? I mean, every large tentpole event we hear about, whether it's the Super Bowl or Friday after Thanksgiving, Black Friday football, like there's new tentpoles coming up all the time. How are you navigating that shift as well with the marketing efforts that you have in sports today?
Yeah, I don't know what I did with myself before streaming. I don't know about you, but major productivity killer for Patty Morris. That's another story. So no question, a big rise in streaming partners. I think someone called it land grabbing earlier. And it's true, and it's consumption habits. It's changing, and we all do that. We all watch these platforms. We're all part of that. So it's natural that will happen. I think that it is, like most things, presents itself with challenges and opportunities. The challenge is fragmentation, right? So gone are the days when we could build a football campaign and look forward to Sunday when everybody tuned in and you monitored social and engaged, and then, Monday morning we did something else until the next Sunday. Like, that's not how it is anymore, right? So there's a challenge in that you've really got to be adept at all of these different platforms and their strengths and weaknesses, and you've got to be really thinking about how to use them together to create a holistic plan to find a football audience. That's just inherently more challenging. However, I would say it also is a really big opportunity for marketers in a couple of ways. The first I would say is these streaming platforms are gold mines of data. So for the first time, we feel like we can deploy a video campaign, I'll call it a video campaign, and be able to do that in a way that we're driving awareness and connection, but at least being able to draw a zigzag line, maybe all the way down to conversion and actually a new insurance policy, because we can work close with Amazon, we can work close with Google, we can work close with Peacock, and not just understand what those consumers are doing, but be able to effectively retarget them and improve our chances of conversion on a product that, frankly, nobody that's watching football really cares about going to buy. So I think there's a huge data opportunity there, and there's content opportunity. So one thing that we've kind of opened our eyes to is it's not just about the data or the see this thing and the next best action. It's also the long opportunities that sports and streaming represent. So look at, quarterback, starting five, these long-form series that people are dying to tune into, and those have a shelf life. So it's not just sort of a one-and-done thing. It's not just only as long as this season is that you can stay in front of people. And a great example of that for us was working with Omaha Productions on the Caitlin Clark documentary with Caitlin and Camilla and Kiki Rice. You didn't just see State Farm show up as a sponsor in the ads in that program. You saw us woven throughout that storyline because we're part of Caitlin's story and because we were kind of side by side with Omaha as they produced that. We worked really closely as a trifecta between Omaha, State Farm, and Caitlin's team to make that happen. And it's just a different kind of engagement with consumers when you're in a program like that and you feel like you're endemic and part of that story, in addition to the ads that we buy and embrace, right? So streaming has kind of opened a whole new world in the sports category for programming that brands can really take advantage of if you find the right authentic places to insert yourself.
It brings the measurability. I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago at Adweek, and somebody asked me, is television about brand building, or is it direct response? And I said, I argue with the premise that it's only brand building. Now we have the feedback loops that you're talking about, where we can have that exposure connected to how that matters to us, and then we can optimize on top of it from there. And you spoke a little bit about the Caitlin Clark work that you've done, and there's others. In a recent article, you said that State Farm is pushing to see characters into high-profile, real-life settings. Jake making an appearance at the women's basketball draft, and sitting with Mama Kelsey and the Eagles games. These are examples. Can you talk about expanding that advertising beyond that traditional 30-second spot and tapping into the fan bases that exist within sports?
Can we try something? Will you guys participate in something with me?
Yes,
Okay.
they will.
Okay. Like a good neighbor. Okay, that's one. Jake from that's two. If I have a claim or I need help, I call a State Farm agent. Okay, a couple of you got that one. My point is, thank you for playing along. When I tell you we are vigilant and very purposeful about 7 core brand assets that we put out into the world, I'm not overstating, like we're crazy about it. So there are 7 of them, and here we go, I'm gonna try to get it right. Bundling! I like this guy, yes, the bundle, yes.
We did not plan to.
Yeah, so we have our jingle, obviously, which is a famous one written by, does anybody know who wrote that jingle? Barry Manilow. The more you know, people, the more you know. So we have our jingle, we have a color red, we have a color khaki because of the famous khakis. We have our logo, we have our ovals on their own, which are highly recognizable. We have State Farm agents, and we have Jake from State Farm. And so Jake is a specific example. That was born out of consumer fandom.
I remember the original commercial. The guy that was talking to his Jake from State Farm agent, his wife comes downstairs.
Yeah, very scandalous. Very scandalous. People loved that character, and it lived, and then it got put on the shelf, and then we brought it back in 2019 with the specific intent. Because in our category, and especially in places like sports, right? Like we're not endemic to sports. So how do you take a non-endemic brand that doesn't have a tangible product and be able to make that part of the cultural lexicon in sports and revenue? It's hard, right? So we said if we can bring that character back in a way that starts to blur the lines between a spokesperson and an influencer, and in a way that capitalizes on the fandom that they already had, it allows us to have a physical presence in places where we otherwise couldn't, in a very lovable way. How powerful could that be for us? And I wish I could tell you we knew back then how great it would be. The person who plays Jake from State Farm brings a lot to that character and has a lot to do with that, but you never ever see us talk about Jake without got the words from State Farm behind it. It's very much on purpose. And so then what happens? You come to a moment where, maximum effort calls you on a Friday night. Ryan Reynolds' agency calls you on a Friday night and says, we have an idea, but we have to do it on Sunday. And we say, what? And basically it's, we think, all of us hullabaloo about Taylor Swift sitting next to Mrs. Kelsey in the suite the week before. Let's put Jake from State Farm next to Mama Kelsey in the stands and just have him show up and see what happens. Nobody can talk about that moment without saying the words Jake from State Farm. So we're able to have a physical person in that moment. The sports audience accepts him because he's pervasive in the advertising and the marketing, and he's talked about in a way that is, the returns on that word exponential, because we're able to put that asset, I don't mean that in a cold way, but we're able to put that asset in those environments in a way that gets earned media that it's priceless, you can't pay for it. So we work to do that with all of our assets, and they have different levels of fidelity in terms of their power that way, but we're really specific about it, and it's really important to our recipe for our marketing and branding.
So this talks a little bit about the impact that live events can create on brand awareness. Can you talk a little bit about how that trickles down into some of the more, caution the word, traditional advertising, your 15s, your 30s, how does that show up? And when you're in these spaces, I think it was just previously discussed a little bit about authenticity, and you're also kind of keying into that, the authenticity that you have to have in these environments.
Yeah, if I think you're asking like beyond the 15 or beyond the 30, like how to think about that. So, Jake's this weird sort of in-between asset that's kind of an influencer. It's its own thing, right? But influencers in general, it's not enough just to put something in front of people. That's important. We'll continue to do that because it's part of how you seep into someone's subconscious and how you build a brand. But engagement is so important. So how you use influencers, how you use real life experiences. Since we're on the track, I'll give you another Jake from State Farm example. Like we're able to go into environments like BravoCon or TwitchCon and have him show up in our real event there, and I can tell you, like, BravoCon is a very specific audience, might be women my age-ish, and there's a line doubled around the place to see Jake from State Farm. We can go to TwitchCon where you've got a bunch of Gen Z gamers, real into it gamers, that particular thing, and they love it because they've seen him in Gamerhood, which is a very specific State Farm gaming challenge that we put out there, and it's the same thing. Gen Z, they're around the block for it, right? So I bring that up just to say, we think about all vantage points of campaign planning pretty much all the time in all things, because you're going to be able to pull different levers in different places. So there are places where those 15s and 30s are very important, and you continue to do that. Sometimes you surround it, sometimes you're going influencer first, and it's a different kind of video content, but equally as important. And when you look at that holistically, are you getting the right amount of reach? Are you getting the right amount of engagement? And the equation we use is reach plus engagement equals attention, and attention is the goal.
So if attention is the goal, how are we optimizing in that situation? Because again, we talked about the feedback loops getting tighter now that you have more of this digital activity happening. It's much more measurable. Where is the optimization strategy? To the extent that you can share, what are you looking at? How are you optimizing? What, from a creative perspective, has an impact for you there? And I guess the sort of general approach to that.
I'm probably not going to give a popular answer to this. Of course we're optimizing. Of course we want all the data we can possibly have at our fingertips. Of course we're iterating on campaigns and looking at how we're using AI to automate audiences and automate creative at scale. We're doing all those things. My fear for us, though, sometimes is we can optimize ourselves into incremental oblivion, right? And I feel like, yeah, and I don't mean to negate the importance of it, it's critical. But I also don't ever want us to get super over-focused on that, or disproportionately focused on it, because I think the harder challenge today is breaking through. The environment, the barrage of things that people see and are exposed to and interact with is all-time high, and it's only going to get higher. So I want us to optimize data and performance. I also want us to optimize our innovation and our creativity in a way that is allowing us to do things that are going to actually break through and get people's attention. And we'll measure whether or not we're doing that, of course, but again, probably not a super popular answer.
No, I think it's beautifully said. When you look at, you said when you first came out, and you have the audience, you have the telescope, you have the microscope. In this case, we're looking from a telescope perspective, and we're saying these are the broad things that are going to have a big impact. You don't want to, you're not indexing in this case all the way down at the microscopic level. You don't want to do that because you may miss something. I think it's beautifully said. So I think panels generally tend to end with questions like this. So apologies for being the stereotype where it is. What does 2025 look like for you and for State Farm and sports marketing? And can you share a preview of what's on the horizon? Again, to an extent you're comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to continue to have a big portfolio of sports because that's where our audiences are and that's where they're passionate. So we'll continue to do that. You're going to see us continue to support women's sports. Yay, thanks everybody for last year. I mean, oh my gosh, right?
3 daughters.
We've been supporting women's sports for more than 20 years in a whole variety of different ways. So for us, we're going to continue that support and visibility because it's just been really great to see what has happened, and it's exceptional to watch, exciting to watch. So we want to keep where people are and where they're excited. So you'll continue to see us do that. And you know, I'm excited about some things we have coming up in basketball. I alluded to that a minute ago. Some pretty big changes for us there in 2025 in terms of how we approach the market that I think are going to get attention. So I'm excited, including a couple of announcements, like I said, in the next couple of weeks, specific to women's sports that we're really excited to be part of.
Well, thank you so much, Patty, for the time today, the insight that you shared. We really appreciate the opportunity to partner alongside you and for this time that we have today.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you all very much. Thanks.